Hey there, everybody. Welcome to the Only Podcast. I am your host, Chris Vanini, joined alongside by the new Only Colors managing editor, Joe Toohey, who has taken over the reins a bit, kind of running the whole ship. All the rest of us are still there, Pete, KJ, everybody. But Joe's kind of running the ship now, so congrats to him. And if you want to send a congrats, feel free to.
Thanks.
Pretty interesting Wednesday. We'll talk about signing day, Michigan State signing day. Spartans had a pretty good day, and we'll also talk about some basketball ahead of the upcoming games. But starting off, Joe, how you doing? Been a pretty busy day for you.
Yeah, I this was an uneventful signing day, which was nice, and got a couple, bits of good news there. Well, three bits of good news, right? Drama free. Everybody got their letter of intent in like pretty quick, really. Other than Brian Lewerke having to find a Kinko's to fax his letter in, which is of course absurd. Nobody had any issues, and then the two guys that MSU was sort of in the mix for, we got both. So yeah, awesome day, really, from a recruiting standpoint.
Yeah, we'll start there with signing day. The Spartans brought in. Was it 20 or 21? I think it was 20.
20. I mean, it depends on how you categorize
Right.
Tariq Thompson.
Tariq Thompson had already signed the financial aid and had enrolled, so
Right.
they officially got 20 new players today for a total class of 21. And
Yeah.
by most accounts, it was about a top 20 class. I think it was 17 in Scout, 22 by 24/7. So on the higher end of what D'Antonio's classes have been, third in the Big Ten behind Ohio State and Penn State. And Joe, when you look at this, like you said, it wasn't very eventful. They got the 18 verbal commitments that they already had. They all came in. They didn't lose anybody, but they also did add two late additions that were not guarantees. Cassius Pete, outside linebacker out of Arizona, and Mufi, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, Mufi Hunt out of Utah, who will actually be taking a 2-year Mormon mission before coming to MSU. But when you look at this class, Joe, I guess we'll kind of start off pretty broad. What stands out to you generally? What do you think is the story of this class this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. There's maybe three things that stand out. The first being just how spread out the class was. I mean, this was truly a national class. A couple guys from Arizona, 3 guys from Texas, just 4 guys from Michigan, and and 5 guys from Ohio. So, really kind of expanding that reach, which is really interesting. That's the biggest one.
Yeah, I think it was about 10 from the Midwest and 10 from outside the Midwest, which is certainly has not been typical of MSU classes.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was part of it. The other interesting thing is how versatile a lot of these guys are. I mean, trying to write player capsules was sometimes difficult because you don't know, so Andrew Dowell, right, one of the Dowell twins, basically anything I could find about him was classified as a running back. D'Antonio and crew look at him as a star linebacker. So both of the Dowell twins, I feel like could play in a bunch of different places. Kari Willis, another guy who can play all over the place. Khalil Gaines could play defensive back or receiver. And I'm not sure, in 2 years, Mufi or Muffy Hunt, however you pronounce that, in 2 years, who knows, he's 6'6", 215 right now. At least that's what he's listed at. He could end up being much bigger in 2 years. He could end up, being that same size and might not be a defensive end exactly at that point. So, yeah, the diverse skill sets of these guys is really interesting, and I wonder how much, D'Antonio's experience with guys like Langford and Lippett, who moved around, played a whole bunch of different positions, sort of made recruits gravitate towards MSU, but then also MSU gravitate towards those guys.
Yeah, and you had, when you talk about, it's probably maybe the most athletic class that D'Antonio has brought in, just in terms of the pure athleticism. And back the national point, they got a couple guys from Texas. I'm sure the Cotton Bowl victory there didn't hurt, although some of the guys were committed by then. But I've read, Texas high school coaches, Michigan State is now able to get in the door of recruits pretty easily. Like D'Antonio said, they're not selling hope, they're selling results. And as a result, you get a class like this that is unlike most of the other ones because of how spread out it is. And, that's only good for MSU when you consider where the most high school talent comes from. You get a guy from Florida, you get guys from Texas, California, and that is, that's where the top talent comes from. Was there a third one? Did you list the third one?
So the third thing I thought was really interesting is the size of a lot of these guys. I mean, Noah Listerman is listed at 6'6", 6'7". Raycon Williams is 6'6", 280 already is listed as. Muffy Hunt is 6'6". Justice Alexander is another big guy. I mean, just the size, the height especially seemed to kind of stand out to me from a class standpoint, whereas there might be one or two huge guys for their positions in other years. It seemed like this year pulling in really a lot of sizable guys right from the get-go.
And and kind of shifting gears there, I guess it kind of plays into that with guys who maybe are size-wise are ready to play. Who when you look at this class, who are some guys you think will have a chance to either play right away or play pretty early in their career?
So the obvious one is LJ Scott at running back, right? Especially because that position's up in the air, and he was probably the highest rated recruit overall. And it's also a position where it's pretty easy to get on the field pretty quickly.
And you look at MSU losing Nick Hill and Jeremy Langford, a lot of inexperience going forward in that group.
Absolutely. And also a position where you can step on the field, and it's a rotational position. It's a place where you might not be the starter, but you probably play some minutes regardless. The other one that was interesting to me, just from the comparisons that D'Antonio makes during the press conferences are always kind of absurd to some extent.
Well, but he made quite some big ones today, I know.
Yeah, which is pretty interesting. But the one thing that has sort of stood out to me about the MSU team, and for a couple of reasons, is defensive back, right? So the one thing is that Darian Hicks was not able to nail down the corner position opposite Trey Waynes. Waynes is gone now, so, and Lippitt is gone as well, and he had played significant time at corner, and so that makes me think the fact that Lippitt flipped over, and the fact also that the other guys on the offensive side were getting looks at corner makes me think that corner is a spot potentially where a guy could step in and play immediately. A guy like Josh Butler out of Texas seems like a pretty well-rounded guy from the get-go. He's a little on the small side, right? He's only like 160 pounds or something like that. But that's an area that'll be really interesting to watch in fall camp, because that's a place where guys might be able to get some playing time. And then also against up-tempo offenses, against Baylor, right, they were really rotating guys through, trying to keep them fresh, and that seems like it might be the strategy going forward against those offenses like Oregon or against Ohio State.
Yeah, I think wide receiver is a position, maybe not in 2015, but in 2016, because they're going to lose quite a number of receivers after that. So guys like Felton Davis and Darrell Stewart, and any athletes who maybe move to that side of the ball. I think wide receiver is another place to look at. When you look kind of at the class overall, who kind of stands out as maybe who may have I don't know how to say this, but the biggest impact in their career, who are kind of not necessarily just because they're the highest rated guys, but when you look at guys who seem to be positioned well, who are a couple you think stand out that were absolutely huge gets?
Yeah, I mean, I think the potential of Rayquan Williams from Chicago, the defensive lineman, just in terms of the size that he's already got, and the contributions he can. I mean, maybe not year one, just because there's some depth along that defensive line already, but over time, if he can live up to a be a disruptive kind of guy. I think that's an impact that could be huge. And then also the late get in Cassius Pete. He seems like the kind of guy who could be a really good pass rusher off the edge. He's listed as a linebacker, but I'm pretty sure that he'll, at 6'4", 235, it's almost certainly going to be, once he packs on a few additional pounds, be a defensive end. So those are the two guys along the defensive line. But yeah, they're the standouts in my mind, at least.
Yeah, and it's always interesting to see who plays early, because D'Antonio's program has always been kind of built on experience, and guys aren't necessarily thrown into the fire unless there's maybe a positional need. But they're generally relying on guys who have redshirted or have sat behind guys for a few years, and it's a relatively small class again, as MSU typically does, because they just don't lose players like other schools do. So it's always kind of hard to tell who will get in and who won't, because of that. There's not usually such an empty spot where they're just trying to plug holes. At least not anymore. It's come a long way from his first class in 2007. And when you look at that, I saw quite a few analysts considering MSU maybe one of the winners of signing day, just simply because they didn't lose anybody. They brought in some solid guys. This is, if you want to go by star ratings, probably one of the best classes they've ever had. There was only one player who had any sort of, at least on 24/7, had any sort of 2-star rating, and they're bringing in more and more 4-star guys. And the story's always been that MSU's clearly got the player development that it takes to elevate players, and he's been doing that with 2-star guys like Trey Waynes and Darqueze Dennard and whatnot. Now, when you're consistently bringing in high 3-stars and 4-star guys, you figure it can only go from there. And it's been said for years that MSU's window had closed. MSU was lucky. I think not only winning 11 games 4 times in 5 years shows that it's not the case, but MSU has backed it up on the recruiting trail. They have adjusted on the recruiting trail. A couple years ago, when Kentucky was doing really well in Ohio, a lot of people said, this isn't good for MSU, because MSU gets a lot of those mid-tier guys in Ohio that Kentucky's been getting. Well, how does MSU react? Last year they get a couple of guys from Pennsylvania and Illinois, where they don't typically get guys, and then this year you got Virginia, California, Florida, Texas. So I think the staff has done a very good job of adjusting to recruiting trends and making sure MSU is improving on the recruiting trail too.
Yeah, and the Dowell twins being a flip recruit here in the last week
Kentucky.
or so. Right, from Kentucky. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It seems like taking Kentucky head on in Ohio makes more sense than not, right? Kentucky has not had the results on the field that it seems like they should, based on some of their recruiting. But yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. It'll be, it's interesting to just see the names and go, okay, well, I'm excited about all these guys, but a good chunk of them won't ever see the field. And one of the more interesting things, I think, in a way to evaluate some of these guys is when you see them play special teams for the first time. That happens so often, where guys like Darqueze Dennard, right, before they played really significant time in a starting spot on defense, he was blocking kicks. That kind of stuff means a lot, because D'Antonio really places the emphasis on special teams. So that's one way to try to suss out at some point, where guys might end up or their sort of progression in the program. If they're playing on special teams, that means that they're probably doing something right.
Yeah, it's pretty clear that D'Antonio has been given more than the benefit of the doubt going into what is 9th year now at MSU. It doesn't matter what a guy's star rating is. Everybody believes that D'Antonio and the staff will maximize that talent. And kind of shifting back to that, I know the old recruiting rankings don't matter deal is always a fun topic, and I know especially for MSU fans, they've got when they look at MSU, it's easy for them to look at it and say recruiting rankings don't matter because it hasn't mattered for them. But I think if you look nationwide, they do matter, but they matter in the context of having the player development there, and that's where it kind of comes back to D'Antonio, where he's done a lot of good work with 2 stars and 3 stars. Now that he's getting in 4 stars, you figure things will keep getting better for them. What is your kind of take on that debate of the importance of the rankings? I don't think the rankings themselves matter. I think they matter within the context, though.
Yeah. So yeah, how much time do you have? I mean, my take on the whole thing is that this was actually the very first post I ever made on the Only Colors way back. It was like summer of 2012. Heck Dorland had written a piece that was pretty interesting, talking about recruiting stars and then sort of how many All Big Ten players came out of various programs. And so I did some adjustments there where I was comparing weighted recruiting average based on all kinds of stuff versus F plus. And I came to a pretty nice conclusion, which is that I got an R-squared value of weighted recruiting ranking versus F plus is 0.5, which means that you can basically say that it's half the battle. And I like that from a narrative standpoint, and that's maybe true in the Big Ten, maybe not. But the interesting thing is it's a problem of information, right? So. And this happens at the other end too, from college to the pros, where guys coming out in the draft, and you have a specific amount of data about him from his college playing days, whether that's scouting or whether that's actual numbers or whatever. You have information about him from that time. But the thing is that once that player gets into the pro league and plays any amount of time, basically you have like an order of magnitude better information about that guy. And so a lot of things happen in like the NBA and the NFL where it's like guys are acquired because it's like, oh, well, he was really good in college. Well, it's a different game in the NBA, right, or in the NFL. So the interesting thing about recruiting rankings, and they have flaws, is that they are good information when you're absent any other information, right? So if you don't have any other information about these guys, which you don't basically, other than their recruiting rankings, it's predictive. But once they get on campus, and you have any other information, and I'd actually be really interested, this is an analysis I've never done, but mining transcripts of D'Antonio talking about players in fall camp, to me seems like it would be very predictive, right? There was that summer where Le'Veon Bell came in and got going immediately, and he was a 2-star. People were mad that we were taking him in a class, and all of a sudden he was playing immediately, early entrant into the NFL, right? So that's my take, sort of, basically, is that recruiting rankings are useful up to a certain point. Once the guy gets on campus and you have any other information, it's not so useful anymore. But until that guy sees the field at all, and actually seeing the field at all, sort of going back to what I said about seeing players on special teams, is in and of itself a useful thing, right? If guys playing on special teams, to some extent, it's likely that he's developing in such a way that allows him to see the field. So that is that's sort of my whole take. They matter until they don't anymore, and that's pretty obvious. There's an interesting take on by the mathlete on MGO blog, who computes roster values. So the basic idea behind roster values is that a 5-star 4 years into a program on average has a particular worth, and you can have roster values up to 1,000. And the theory there is that roster value and a 3-star as a freshman is worth significantly less, and so there's this whole scale or whatever. To me, that's an absurd system for ranking rosters, because you basically are ignoring all of this better information that you've got. And so, yeah, to me, it's a problem of information, and they do, right, they matter until they don't anymore.
And you mentioned Bell there, and it kind of it makes me think of some of the wild comparisons D'Antonio made today. I know he compared Brian Lewerke to Kirk Cousins multiple times, and when D'Antonio publicly comments on a player that we the public maybe hasn't heard much about, or a recruit in this sense, he's usually pretty on. And I know that was easier for Le'Veon Bell because he had a semester under him. But, every year there's some guys that the coaches will mention that are breakouts, and more often than not, or quite often, they're correct. Shalik Calhoun was a guy who coaches raved about for years until he finally got on the playing field last year and became Big Ten Defensive Lineman of the Year. So when you look at D'Antonio's comparisons to other players and you look at his track record, it would not be hard to see why MSU fans can be excited about some players. No, go ahead.
So yeah, I mean, you're right. It's just, if all of these guys turn out to be their D'Antonio comparisons, we're going to win national titles every year for the next 3 years, right? Like, I don't think so. Some of them are going to be wrong, right? But there's some truth to some of those comparisons.
Yeah. Before we move on to basketball, any other signing day comments you want to make, either about MSU or about the day in general?
Well, the one thing that I don't think we talked enough about, and maybe it's just me, but like, we got a better class than Michigan finally, right? Like, why is that not being like pounded into our heads? Like, it's a better class. Like this is the first time ever, right? Like, I'm not a
probably,
for the most part over the years I haven't been a huge
there was a couple years ago, I know they were pretty close. Was it 2014? Let me pull up.
Yeah, I think it was
here.
The first Hokie or something.
Last year Michigan was 20th and Michigan State was 25th, so they were close. But in terms of consensus being ahead of them, no, they haven't, and I would imagine they never have. And I mean, you look at the reasons why. Jim Harbaugh was brought in. Not just late, but he was the last. It was right after Christmas. He was the last new head coach out there. The head coaching carousel kind of filled up quickly, until Central opened up last week. But at the time, it was the last opening there, and they waited for quite a while. A number of recruits decommitted, but they got their guy, and we've talked about this before. I don't think there's any doubt that Jim Harbaugh will have success at Michigan, but I do think it was a little bit of a surprise that Michigan had an okay class for what they had. It was going to be a small class, which isn't something they had typically done, but maybe not as good as people had expected going into the year. I know they got a couple late guys on Wednesday, which made it look a little bit better, but the name Jim Harbaugh got him into a lot of doors. But he even admitted there was maybe a little bit of rust, coming from the NFL. It's not something he's really had to do. So, but whatever the reason is, MSU fans can, for all the, I think it would be weird for MSU fans to be proclaiming this whole thing about MSU having a higher ranked class, given for the last 8 years they've been on the other side of it and saying it doesn't matter. So I think that's probably the reason why you don't see it very much. But
yeah, maybe. But still, like, I mean, okay, I don't know. It just feels like.
I mean, if you're happy about it, you can be happy about it. That's fine. I'm just saying. Even, I haven't seen it very much. I haven't seen many MSU fans, make a big deal about recruiting today because they haven't in the past. So I would think that's a good way to go with fans. Otherwise, you're kind of looking hypocritical.
Yeah, but like, I don't know. I don't mind being a hypocrite. I mean, in general too, the third best class in the Big Ten. I'm not sure that we've been number 3 in the Big Ten before. Just with the other powers that typically recruit really well, Nebraska, and then Michigan and Ohio State and Penn State, you always figure that those 4 will be above MSU on a consistent basis or a historical basis at least. But even programs like, we got a better recruiting class than anybody in Big Ten West, and also our main rival. Like, I don't know, like maybe I just got busy earlier and I missed all of the hubbub, but it's like.
Yeah, it was.
I think
it was a good day. It was a good day for MSU. What's that?
Yeah.
What was
I
that?
think it wouldn't be totally out of the question for the Dance of Joy to be a post today. I think I don't know.
Well, I mean,
Maybe I'm overreacting.
you run the
But
site now, so it's your call, I guess. But but I do think it's after the last few years of recruiting rankings don't matter. MSU's proven it. Look at all these 2 stars we turned into winners. I think fans aren't going to get over, uh, flip on the other side of that and all of a sudden believe in the recruiting rankings and all that. But it was a good day for MSU, and I think Mark D'Antonio seemed pretty happy, and the doesn't appear that MSU football would be going anywhere. And speaking of Michigan, we haven't spoken since they defeated the Wolverines in hoops in overtime last Sunday, and they've got Illinois coming up this Saturday. But looking back at the game on Sunday against Michigan, very weird game, very ugly game. Michigan was missing probably its 2 best players in Derek Walton and Karis LeVert to injury. MSU was healthy, but couldn't hit the broadside of a barn, and found themselves leading at 5 by halftime, despite shooting something like 35% or something like that. And but Michigan comes back in the second half, pushes its lead in deep into the second half. MSU goes on a run to take a decent lead back in the final minutes, and Michigan is able to tie it and send it to overtime, where Spartans outscored them, I think, 10-0 to win in overtime. Then the back and forth of MSU fans are happy, but Michigan fans, we didn't have anybody on our team. I think coming out of that game, I think both fan bases could be happy with their team's respective performances. MSU played pretty poorly and got a win it needed to win it needed to have. Michigan was playing walk-on guards in the first half and went to overtime at Breslin, and they're a really young team. And whether or not they make the tournament, I think they're a big part of this will go toward next year. But when you looked at that Michigan game, Joe, what were your feelings kind of coming out of it?
Well, I thought Denzel Valentine was just phenomenal. He put up a 25-7-7, right? That's a huge game. He shot really well from the field, and it had taken a lot of heat really in a lot of games during the Big Ten season. I don't think necessarily that he got his due there. The other thing is Travis Trice didn't have a great shooting day, but chipped in, had 6 boards, 9 assists, only 2 turnovers. Considering that he was injured, right, and sort of the backcourt in general had taken a lot of heat for its relative failings in Big Ten season. I don't know. They just feel like guys who should probably get a little more credit. And during times that mattered, they did come through. So, those things are interesting to me. That in games that MSU has lost or have been closer than expected, those guys have taken a lot of heat, but then haven't gotten the requisite credit for helping win big games too. So that was something. And then Costello in overtime obviously was insane.
He's been like the overtime guy. That Costello overtime period, that was the Matt Costello I expected to see this year. He was a guy who I thought would be MSU's breakout player based on how he played when he got in games this time. I was expecting a big breakout year, and it hasn't happened. He doesn't start now behind Gavin Schilling, but he did everything in overtime that he can do and that people have expected him to do consistently. You mentioned Trice. He's really become the true point guard that MSU has seemingly lacked in maybe quite a while, unless you want to count the Keith Appling, who couldn't shoot. But he's among the nation's leaders, I think, in assist-to-turnover ratio, even when his shooting's not on, so he's been valuable there. He came up big late in regulation in the Michigan game. But I think over the last couple games, I think a guy is really starting to stand out. And a guy we mentioned on our last podcast that needed to step up or have more was Bryn Forbes. He needed to have just more shots. He was a guy who had kind of sort of disappeared quite a bit. But against Michigan, he had He took 7 threes. He took 7 threes and only won 2. So he's kind of a 3-point guy there. But he went 3 for 8, 1 for 2 at the line. So he's taken more shots, and that's what I think people have wanted to see from him. And against Rutgers, he did similarly. So Spartans are sitting at 6-3 in the Big Ten, which is tied for second in the loss column.
Yeah.
Hope you're gonna say something.
No, that's all. I was gonna say it was amazing to me that Purdue pulled out that win today against
they've won I think 4 in a row and 3 against top 25 teams. So they're kind of getting on a roll there. I don't know what their tournament outlook looks like because they lost some pretty ugly non-conference games, but MSU doesn't play at Mackey this year, and they don't even play Purdue till the second last game of the year, which is at Breslin, which will be the senior night game. So that's quite a bit of ways away still. But yeah, they don't play Wisconsin or Purdue all year until March. That's pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, I agree.
And Minnesota. Minnesota's February 26th. So 3 of their last 4 games are against teams they hadn't played. Will not have had played all year. But Saturday they have Illinois at home at Breslin. Ken Pom has a 72-63 MSU win, 81% chance of victory. Illinois has been a pretty balanced team. They're a little bit better on defense than they are on offense, but they're top 100 on both sides. They've had some tough ones in Big Ten play. They're sitting at 5-5. What are you kind of looking at in this game?
So yeah, I mean, I think Illinois is probably a little underrated. Some of those games, the margins have looked probably a little larger than how close the game actually was. And they've had a lot of new contributors this year, right? A lot of transfers came in. Ravante Rice has been in and out. So I think Illinois is maybe a little underrated. They definitely have a lot more talent on the floor at this juncture than Michigan did. And so MSU's going to have to play a lot better.
I do. Well, overall they do, but I think Ravante Rice looks like he's still suspended, as is Aaron Cosby. As of 2 days ago, they remain suspended indefinitely. So that's kind of hurt. They'll likely be undermanned a bit at Breslin, so it kind of skews their numbers. And I know they've also had some injuries, so their numbers are kind of not totally representative of what the team is right now. But something that sticks out about them is free throw shooting. They're number 2 in the country in free throw shooting, making just about 80%, while MSU has not done a good job of either preventing teams from getting to the line or missing at the line, although that's kind of just plain luck. But MSU's 279 in free throw defense, as it were. But no, keep going, Si.
No worries. It's a winnable game. It's a game that should be won. But if they end up playing defense the way that they've played against Michigan, against Maryland, at Maryland, against Penn State, and against Nebraska, you're not going to win many games playing defense in that way. So that'll be really interesting to see if they can finally come around a little bit defensively and shoot a little better too. I mean, the shooting has kind of gone cold a little bit in Big Ten play from where it was in the non-conference. So those are going to be the two interesting things to watch. Other than the free throw shooting, which is sort of inexplicable, although we had a nice post go up from a new contributor this week, sort of showing how, for whatever reason, ISO teams in the last 3 years, after game 21, tend to improve their free throw shooting near the back half of conference season. So
yeah, check that out if you haven't read it.
Yeah, let's pray for that because that would be hugely helpful. But yeah, it's definitely an area for regression towards the mean, both in terms of guys being able to shoot a little better from the line, and also opponents not shooting quite so well from the line. So that's interesting, and sort of the back half of this conference season, a lot of very winnable games. A couple games against Illinois that should be winnable. Ohio State just suspended Mark Loving, so that game at home, depending on whether or not Loving is playing for that, might look a little easier. Games against Northwestern, sort of a beaten down Minnesota, definitely a lot of winnable games. They gotta, there's a scenario in which this is a 12-6 team in conference, right? 6-3 in the first half of the season, conference season, something like that in the second half, probably definitely doable. Right?
Well, they're in the stretch where after the Iowa game, we knew they were going to be favored in almost everything up until the Wisconsin game, and heavily favored in most of the upcoming games, other than the game at Maryland, which they lost. But you look at it, and they've won them generally, but they haven't been easy by any means. They beat Northwestern in overtime at home. They lost to Maryland. They beat Penn State at home by 6. You lose at Nebraska by 2, needing a furious comeback to make it that close. That continues to be a bad loss. MSU's second sub 100 loss, or above 100 loss. Yeah, sub 100 loss.
Yeah.
They took care of business at Rutgers, but then Michigan in overtime against a very undermanned Michigan team. That game goes to overtime. So you look at Illinois, you look at MSU being favored by 81%, but MSU really has not been able to pull away from many teams, especially in Big Ten play for whatever reason. So I think this is going to be another one of those games that is maybe too close for comfort for MSU fans, but it's one that they need to win if they want to make the tournament. Just like on Tuesday, they play Northwestern. Similar deal, 73% favorite. Those are two games that I think MSU will have some trouble in, but they're winnable games, and they're games that they're going to have to win, I think, to beef up this conference record a bit, because they weren't able to beef up their record in non-conference play.
Yeah, so so halfway through, right? So there's 9 more conference games. You figure playing at Wisconsin you just chalk that up as a loss. So of the remaining 8 games, they're all very winnable, and they're all very,
they're above 60% favorite in 3 of them. They're above 50% in 6 of them. Let me count that right. 1, 2, 3. No, 4. I'm sorry. They're above 60% in 4, plus 3 in the 50s. Yeah.
Yeah, I figure. Yeah, if they go 5-4 in the second half, which is what Ken Pound projects, you get to 20 wins. You get to 11-7 in conference. That's a good enough resume for the tournament. And I think that there's a chance, based on if free throw shooting improves just a hair, right? That it's better than 5-4 here in the back half. 7-2 is definitely not out of reach, and that would make a 13-5 conference record would be kind of amazing. And it's certainly possible.
At the same time, they could.
There's reasons for opposite.
At the same time, if they go with cold shooting, like they did at stretches against Michigan or Penn State, maybe they don't get away with one. So, they lost that one in Nebraska that they shouldn't have. It'll be interesting to see if they have any ones like that come back to haunt them, because their only real chance for a good resume building victory would be Ohio State at home and at Wisconsin, and maybe at Michigan. Maybe that's in there too, but because the Big Ten is just full of fringe teams right now. There's not really any, you get a win here and it really boosts your resume. You just have to win as many of them as you can.
Yeah, that's true. That's sort of the downside. So the upside for a weak Big Ten is that lots of winnable games, but the downside is that lots of sort of fringe games as well, teams that are trying to claw into the tournament. So, yeah, it'll be the back half. I think we're in for a couple of twists and turns one way or another here. There's still a full month left. It's pretty wild to think about, though. A month from now we'll be in March, and it's a short month too. So this second half of conference season is going to go by quick. I'm afraid.
Yep. The race to the finish a little bit. MSU is by no means safe in the NCAA tournament as they try to keep that streak going. So as the football team enjoys a good day, the basketball team continues to have to grind away at everything. We'll see how things play out. So that's going to wrap things up here. Hopefully we'll be back again next week. Thanks for listening to the only podcast on theonlycolors.com. Make sure you check out all the various stories and whatnot we have up on the site. Like Joe mentioned, we got some good stuff up there. So read it, comment on it, talk to people in the comment sections about it. That's what we like to do here. So that's going to do it for Joe Toohey. You can follow him on Twitter at Jobin2E. I am Chris Vanini, Twitter at Chris Vanini. Thanks for listening, and we will talk to you guys later. See you.